This week we are looking at my favorite recommendations from 2021, Part 2. In 2021, I emailed 157 art-related items to members of my free Sunday recommendations list. There's a link to join that on the blog post. For supporters, I recommended 52 more items. The items in this week's post, last week's post, and next week's are my favorites among them. They include 12 items that were originally shared only with supporters, which are marked with 2 asterisks. Under painting, there are 2 paintings tied for the winner. This one is Sargent's Carnation Lily Lily Rose, painted 1885 to 1886. In 1884, Sargent's portrait of Madame X caused such a scandal that he left Paris, settling for a time in the Cotswolds with the family of his friend Francis David Millet, another American painter. Also staying there was Robert Louis Stevenson, who was at the time writing A Child's Garden of Verses. Stevenson's poetry inspired Sargent to create this painting of children at dusk. To capture the light, Sargent painted for a short time every evening from September into November 1885, a technique that Monet made famous with his series paintings in the early 1890s, so later. The final touches to this painting were done in 1886. Frederick Lord Leighton, then president of the Royal Academy, encouraged the Tate Gallery to purchase this painting, which made it the first of Sargent's paintings to enter a public collection. The painting's title comes from Ye Shepherds Tell Me by Joseph Mazingi, a popular song of the time in which a lover seeks news of his beloved. Tell me, have you seen my Flora pass this way? A wreath round her head, around her head she wore, carnation, lily, lily, rose. And tied for first place among the paintings is this painting by an unknown artist of another unknown artist. We assume that this is a painter's palette here. One of the reasons that I love exploring small city museums is that I often find striking works that I've never seen illustrated, such as this one at the Michel and Donald Damour Museum of Fine Arts in Springfield, Massachusetts. It was once identified as a portrait of Baron von Schweiter by Eugène Delacroix. According to the museum's label, that attribution now seems unlikely, but it does look very much like a brooding artist of the Romantic period, doesn't it? That would make it early 19th century. Here are a couple runners-up. This is Peter Paul Rubens' Lady in Waiting. It's in Vienna. Was done around 1623. This woman reminds me of a couple characters in the Giordano Bruno series, which I mentioned last week in my favorites among fiction. I've given you a link to an article where I discuss this drawing in more detail. And then there are runners-up in landscapes, which there are 5 of them. Sometimes I don't even try to resist. Okay, this is Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Harvesters at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was done in 1565. The Harvesters made the cut for my current art book in progress, Getting More Enjoyment from Paintings You Love, because I've been fond of this particular painting for decades. I always assumed that I was just letting my eye wander at will among the fantastic detail. But when I started working through the painting for the book, it turns out that Bruegel, I don't actually know how to pronounce his name. It turns out that Bruegel actively directed my attention by means of his composition, the way objects are arranged on the canvas. So starting at the lower left, the edge of the wheat field curves up and somewhat to the right. The piles of wheat that have been cut are a dotted line echoing and reinforcing the curving edge of the wheat field. So here, dot, 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 dot. Both of these end just behind the tree that's near the center of the painting. And then the tree's dark vertical line leads the eye down to this group of workers who are having a picnic beneath a tree. These 2 major lines of Bruegel's composition, the curving line of the wheat and the vertical of the tree, are elegantly simple, but they make you look both at the workers and the wheat fields, which are the 2 important elements of the painting. After working through this painting for an hour or so, I can finally put into words at least part of the reason that I like it. It shows a prosperous community that's collaborating to harvest the abundant crops that they have all planted. Also a runner-up, Maxfield Parrish's River at Escutney from 1942. At age 61, when many artists would be thinking of retirement, Parrish decided to paint only landscapes, and he did so for the next 30 years. The colors are even brighter than those in his earlier works, probably because there are no figures to which the landscape has to be subordinated. While I admire Parrish's perseverance and his color choices and his ability to paint detail, this particular landscape is a favorite for more sentimental reasons. It reminds me of the landscape that I grew up in, although I'm sure the colors were never actually this bright back in Pennsylvania. For more on Parrish, see my book Artist Entrepreneurs. The last location I've been able to find for this painting is at the Vos Galleries in Boston in 1977, so presumably it's in private hands somewhere now. Another runner-up, Frederick Toming, Swordfish Fishing off Capri, circa 1830 to 1840. The colors and the detail in this just take my breath away. Capri, just outside the Bay of Naples, has been a tourist haven ever since Emperors Augustus and Tiberius built multiple villas there in the 1st century A.D. This one is Joseph Mallard William Turner's The Fighting Temeraire, tugged to her last berth to be broken up. It's painted in 1838 and it's at the National Gallery in London. Hms Temeraire, launched in 1798, played only a minor role in the Napoleonic Wars until the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. There she was astern of Horatio Nelson's flagship, the HMS Victory, and came to Victory's rescue, capturing 2 French ships in the process. She was known henceforth as the Fighting Temeraire. Nearly 35 years later, when steamships were becoming common, she was an outmoded relic of the age of sail and was condemned to be broken up for scrap. In this 4-foot wide painting, Turner envisions the Temeraire, almost ghost-like, being towed away against a blazing sunset by a steam-powered tugboat. When 007 meets a new Q in Skyfall, from 2012 and still one of my favorite Bond movies, the two of them have a prickly conversation in front of this painting at the National Gallery. It's just a reminder that one's favorites don't necessarily depend on subject, style, or theme. This painting made the cut for favorite recommendations because of the association with Skyfall. And the last of the runners-up. This is Frederick Ballard Williams's Bright Angel Trail from 1913. When prospectors in the Grand Canyon area discovered that the tourist trade brought in more money than mining did, they improved the old Native American trail from the canyon's rim down to the river. The Bright Angel Trail is now one of the primary hiking paths in the Grand Canyon. Williams studied at the Cooper Union and National Academy of Design in New York City, and after a trip out west, established himself in New York City. For more on painters of the American West, see my post on Thomas Moran. This painting is at the Michelle and Donald D'Amour Museum of Fine Arts in Springfield, Massachusetts. And now we move on to sculpture. There's a clear winner in this one. Evelyn Longman's Genius of Electricity, also known as The Spirit of Communication or Golden Boy, created in 1915. For its new 29-story headquarters at 195 Broadway, AT&T requested models of a seated figure of Zeus who wields thunderbolts. Longman won the competition with this sculpture of a young, winged, muscular man carrying lightning in one hand and loops of cable in the other. The cable ends in a sizzle of the electricity that powered AT&T's telephone and telegraph lines. For decades, the 24-foot figure stood out against the New York City skyline and was used in AT&T's branding. In 1980, it was moved to the lobby of AT&T's new headquarters on Madison Avenue, and by 2002, it was in New Jersey. Since 2009, it has been at the company's headquarters in Dallas. Evelyn Longman, 1874 to 1954, was among the first American women to make a career of creating monumental public sculpture. After studying at the Art Institute of Chicago, 1898 to 1900, she became a studio assistant to Daniel Chester French, who sent some commissions her way. By 1906, she was able to support herself with her own work, most often in the early years by submitting to blind competitions where her work could not be rejected because she was a woman. I've given you links to articles on the Genius of Electricity and to Longman. Okay, we have 2 runners-up. This one is Daniel Chester French's His Majesty, which just makes me smile as a title. It was done in 1931. Thanks to Dana Pilson, curatorial researcher at Chesterwood, for supplying photos of this charming but little-known work. Chesterwood has 3 copies. The one on display is in a side room in the visitor center, and I actually missed it, which is why I don't have pictures of my own. And finally, Cicero d'Avila, Caryatid ruiva, red-headed caryatid, might date to around 2017. What a lovely work this is. And, this was a surprise, the sculptor knows why he creates this sort of work. Here's a long quote. Of course, these types of politics, he means the statements of critics in the art world, inhibit and intimidate many sculptors who are seeking the freedom and space to follow their own path, particularly those whose work expresses a union of technique and creativity, and who, above all, are inspired to create beauty and poetry in their art. I'm part of this latter group. I carry on my work, staying true to my ideals, and don't follow market dictates or make choices based on any kind of intellectual or political impositions whatsoever. Over the course of my career, I found it's, in fact, quite possible to survive and get along in this way. My sculptures have been acquired by significant private collectors throughout the world, and this has financially helped me maintain a very high standard of quality in my work. End of the quote. The quote is from an interview. There's a link to that in the blog post that includes many more photos of Avila's work. Avila is in the first generation of sculptors to use a CNC, computer numerically controlled, milling machine in his work. He creates a clay or a plaster maquette that is digitally scanned and loaded into a CNC. The machine then carves the block down to a certain level and the artist finishes the details. According to Avila, CNC machines can cut production time for a life-size sculpture from 2 years to 4 months. I've given you a link to a video of the creation of a different work using CNC. Hat tip Sam Axton on Facebook for the original recommendation of this sculpture and for the link to the CNC video. For more of Avila's work, you can look up his Instagram feed. And just closing out what I wrote this past year, in 2021, I published The Financial Programs of Alexander Hamilton by a Farmer's Daughter. It was a massive amount of research and writing, but I'm very glad I did it, and happy that it has received such positive comments. Also out this year are the last 2 volumes of my edition of Henry Kitchell Webster's Collected Short Works and Related Correspondence, volumes 3 and 4 covering 1915 to 1932. All of my books are available in Kindle and or print format on Amazon. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the free Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards, as well as many thanks, by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.